This is Senior Housing Radio, your source for industry news from industry experts.
Everyone, we have with us Steve Simpson of Alliance Technologies. Steve will be providing us a glimpse into what Alliance is doing with senior living management companies and the IT strategies involved with the executive teams running these organizations. We'll let Steve take over here and provide us his presentation for this segment of our webcast series.
Thanks, Charles. Looking forward to walking through this with you today. So I'm Steve Simpson with Alliance Technologies. I've been in and around senior living for most of my career here at Alliance Technologies, which spans soon to be about 18 years. And really wanted to talk to you today about creating scale for your organization through partnerships and the IT considerations that you need to be looking at as you think about scale. And scale in terms of all the industries that our firms work with. We're seeing senior living as really facing a lot of scale issues that most organizations do not. Many of you out there are adding new communities regularly, doubling, tripling in size in a matter of a year or a couple of years. That's unprecedented in a lot of industries. I was watching a documentary just the other night about the blue whale, the largest mammal on Earth, and a filmographer was trying to put scale to it. We see stuffed whales and things in museums, but never see it in the wild and understand the scale. So really drives home the fact that scale is difficult to fathom, difficult to understand, and in this case can be difficult to plan for. So we're hoping to put some context to it around your IT operation for supporting the communities that you own and operate and manage. I'm going to hit several areas. First, I'm going to challenge you in your thinking a little bit about IT to start. I want to talk about some of the considerations around your IT operation itself as you prepare to scale, and then also look at some of the options for structuring your IT organization so that you're well positioned for that scaling as you continue to grow. So I want to start off with a bit of a challenge, and that is to challenge the way you think about IT currently. Right now, too many people think about the cool carbon fiber laptops and the new phones and the smaller tablets and what's coming out from Apple and Samsung lately, and the latest apps coming out and all those fun things that seem to drive IT. I'm here to tell you it's not about the cool things. It's not about what's cool at all. You need to run your IT like you run the rest of your business. This is a business decision. This is a business operation. Having the latest, greatest laptop doesn't necessarily lend to your bottom line, doesn't lend to your operation, your ability to serve your seniors. Really what it comes down to is IT is really about servicing the people that you take care of and managing the operations that help take care of them. It's about being able to take care of the seniors in your communities. It's about being able to provide secure healthcare information. It's about being able to make sure that supplies are managed appropriately, that your staff is able to interact with your seniors on an ongoing basis. Some of the things we look at also is allowing for easier growth as well. Again, if you get away from the cool factor and trying to follow the latest, greatest trend, it's much easier to be modular and almost plug and play in your growth. And last but not least is just security itself. Chasing the latest cool tool really is a challenge from a security standpoint because a lot of the security practices and applications haven't caught up to the new software. And really when it comes down to senior living, there's one thing that we always talk about with IT. It just has to work, period. There's no discussing that. It's a core tenet for senior living, simplicity and making it work. We know there are state regulations and your time to care once a notification is received. And literally, there are instances where lives are at stake based around your IT. So again, gimmicks, gadgets, and cool apps in the store don't really lend themselves to just making sure that IT always works. I want to kind of dive into some considerations around several key areas then around an IT operation and some ways to think in terms of how you create your organization, how you position your organization for now, but more importantly as you scale and as you grow. And I really like going back to an image of an iceberg. The structure of an iceberg, we all know it. Everything above the water is visible, is a known quantity. Often what's below the surface is ignored, and at some ship's peril. But I like this in terms of an IT structure. Very often we see organizations that have a single person that is running their IT for a broad company or organization, maybe multiple locations. And that person may be very good at what they do, but all that they're good at is what they're good at. Their depth or their breadth doesn't go any farther than that. Even within a well-formed IT organization, if it's a small organization, again, you are limited by the resources that you have on staff. I would really encourage you to think beyond that and think about that breadth and depth, that thinking in terms of outside resources, and whether it's exclusively outside resources or complementing your internal resources. When you work with an IT firm of virtually any size, you have availability of resources that you can't hire on an annual basis. You couldn't bring on staff and keep enough expertise lined up wide and deep to provide what you can with an IT firm. In Alliance's case, for example, you may have a assigned technician or account manager for your organization, but that person has access to a lot of resources with people that sit in their vicinity to be able to ask questions, bounce ideas off of, to gain expertise or access to expertise that you simply cannot get at that level above the water. One of the other areas that I like to focus organizations on and really think in terms of, to be able to scale, especially the way you as senior living management and ownership companies are, doubling, tripling, quadrupling over multiple years, you've got to be able to create a repeatable process. And that goes down to even down the type of hardware that you have, the software that you're using, so that every community that you add literally is cookie cuttered. You're not letting individuals decide which flavor of laptop they want, which type of tablet they want, how big a desktop they want, what size screen they want. The more you can standardize that, the easier it becomes. In Alliance's case, a lot of times we've started with the software. Your software often defines how you're providing your services to your residents, whether it's your point of sale, your EMR or your EHR, any information like that. That software, because it comes from outside vendors, often you don't have a lot of control over that, or your control is picking a particular vendor. From there, we look at creating standard hardware packages. Come up with a list of, this is the accepted hardware, and very, very narrow packages. In fact, in one case, we've created bundles defined by work position. So an ED has a defined laptop bundle they get with a certain number of monitors, 2 monitors, for example, for the type of work they do. Your med cart will get a certain device on there. Your CNAs will get a certain device to be able to provide their care. By doing that, you very much simplify your operation. Rolling out that hardware becomes, again, a cookie cutter process. Every machine alike is very easy to say, we know how we're going to roll this out. When you need to move machines around, it's very easy to do that as well. One of the things I want to kind of insert right here too is this is just a personal aside, but seeing a proliferation of a lot of iPad devices. And they've become very popular with the CNA staff, with your care staff, and I know with marketing as well. That is one device that Apple likes to maintain control of, and we're seeing that deepening. That as much as Apple would like to tell us that their devices are enterprise ready, as an IT firm, we're not quite seeing that yet. We have to manage iPads differently than we do any other device in your environment. We actually have to set up a separate infrastructure a lot of times to manage those, to make sure that they're secure, to update them. And so I'd encourage you to look at other options beyond an iPad if you're looking at those as your way to deliver your care or your marketing resources. Again, going back to standardization, I know it's easy to beat up on Microsoft, but we as organizations, as IT firms, as managers know how to secure and deploy and manage Windows devices, and there are a lot of options out there as you look beyond laptops and desktops. I'll get off my soapbox for a moment on that and then hit one of the last considerations, and this one is probably the elephant in the room. It's security. More and more technology decisions and even hardware purchases are being driven by security concerns, and you're all familiar with them. You're beholden to HIPAA compliance, to CMMS, PCI if you're handling any credit card information. Never mind the state regulators and everybody's coming in to look at your environment. So I won't dwell on this one, just to make sure we put a fine point to it. I do want to give you a little twist on the security side as well. If you've created a secure environment in your community for your staff, you may actually have created a secure environment for your residents, depending on how your network is created. Was visiting with one of my friends at who's an ED at a community nearby here, and I've actually done some discussions helping him with marketing to potential residents. We've turned it around that because of the security of his network, because he has web filtering to keep the malware and things out, we're protecting inbound email and things like that, he is able to provide enterprise class protection for his residents. So the residents don't need to have family members come in and try and tweak their hardware and software or their laptop to be secure and hope that things aren't coming through. And we know a lot of seniors are susceptible to a lot of the phishing scams and things out there. He's able to relay that to a benefit to a potential resident, that they are actually going to be protected when they become a resident of that community. So again, a different way to think about what you're doing as a community, turning around to a benefit for your residents. I want to transition into our last section here. Is several approaches to now how to structure your IT. We've talked about the considerations you need to look at and some of our beliefs around that, but I want to kind of back up a little bit and talk about generic approaches. And I'm going to start with the whole in-house versus outsourcing discussion, and that's a common one as you visit with IT firms, and maybe as you're looking at other areas that you're dealing with as well. But again, I want to go back to that iceberg example. Think in terms of the fact that with an in-house IT staff, you are limited by the knowledge of the people on your staff there, and maybe their access to Google and searching ideas, but the breadth and depth of their expertise is as wide and as deep as your IT expertise will go. And again, there are probably places where that is a good way to look at things, but as we'll look here in a few minutes about costs and opportunities to control your environment, there are some things you need to consider along that. Again, I had to drive a fine point to discussion earlier about depth and breadth by outsourcing or contracting with an IT firm. Again, by providing that outsource agreement or that outsource arrangement, you have access to resources on a daily basis that you don't have to go find, that you let your IT vendor go find. I'm in the midst of that right now with another customer, a client of mine that is making some changes and needs some expertise that they don't have on staff. We've been in the environment. We have some people that can help out. even to the point of I have somebody on vacation that can do that, but another person that is not that can fill in for it. Again, you get some flexibility would be the other side of it with the outsourcing that you would not have with an fully in-house arrangement. There are other things as we get into other ways to make that arrangement for outsourcing, whether it is, I'll call it ad hoc, where you are paying simply hourly rates for somebody to respond to an issue. And again, that's a very easy way to think in terms of IT assistance. Maybe perhaps you're calling a help desk and they are responding with an engineer who comes out and fixes your wireless or manages your firewall or repairs a desktop. The other extreme of that is managed services, and that's become a growing trend as more and more firms that we're talking to are talking about focusing on their core competencies. Whether that core competency is managing retirement communities and providing services to seniors. I have peers that are working in the banking industry where bankers want to work on financial transactions, a trucking company that wants to focus on that, and they don't want to be burdened with how do I keep my servers up to date and on down the line? How do I make sure my firewalls are secure? So managed services really become a fixed price service that includes both that watching to make sure things are operational and then the maintenance that goes into repairing things as well. So again, another different approach to a couple different approaches within the whether you bring your IT staff in-house or how much you outsource. Another area, and this is a bit of an eye chart, but in kind of approaches to IT, is whether you look at I'll use a pay-as-you-go, as I mentioned before, hourly rate, pay-as-you-use-it model, or move into kind of the other extreme is a subscription, a one price for all rate to an outside firm. And what this chart tries to get at, on the horizontal axis, we've kind of laid out the manageability of your IT results, how much control you have over things getting done the way you expect them to be done and the way you want them to be done. And then on the vertical axis, we're talking about the control over budgeting. Toward the top of it, you have more control over budgeting. At the bottom of it, you have less control over the ongoing budget. And it's not meant to be funny, but we put at the top left of that doing nothing. And that is a viable option for some firms, is to do nothing around your IT. That is very unmanageable as far as the results, because you will have hardware and software go out of date and fail. But from a cost standpoint, you know exactly what you're spending, which is absolutely nothing. From an in-house IT perspective, you have very strong control over the budget for that organization. What you put into it is your salaries and any hardware and software purchases that you have, or data connections on down the line from there. So you as an organization, you as a business owner, have complete control over the budget that goes into that organization. I'd argue that you're kind of middling in your amount of control over the results from that. Again, go back to the iceberg. You are beholden to the expertise that your on-site, your in-house IT staff has available. So your control over that, those results are probably near optimal, but a little bit less than optimal. I've thrown in a couple of the traditional arrangements with firms like ourselves. Would be either some areas very popular as a block hour arrangement where you buy up, call it 25 hours, 250 hours at a preset rate from a vendor, and then they work those down. I would argue that you have, while you have a little more control over the cost, you have less control over the results, because the driving factor for that firm now becomes doing as little as they can to get those hours used down, and perhaps charging, if somebody's spending 8 hours to do something that should have taken 6 hours, they're going to buy up those hours as quickly as possible, or use up those hours as they can. The other option down the lower left-hand side would be another traditional vendor support model, where you're paying ad hoc for every hour that's used, but you're paying after the fact. So you get a monthly bill that says, here's everything that was done by XYZ IT firm. Again, this is probably the area where you have the least control over your budget, because unless you have put on very tight restrictions on when that firm responds and how long they're in your shop, they're going to work a problem until they get it resolved. And some of those problems, knowing my guys like I do, a lot of them like to work it to the extreme. We're fortunate to have a lot of people that are good to know when to call the ball to say, no, this is not fixable, we need to move on. But again, you also have less control over those results because you're handing that responsibility off to somebody completely and hoping that you get the right response. Want to move into that upper right-hand quadrant, and I've put some color to those to talk about. These are really some managed service type of options for you. Toward that center, both axes, I've got just what I term a monitor environment. This is where a firm may provide just an agent, if you will, on pieces of hardware to make sure that it's up and running, and then provide hourly support as there are issues. What we found with that over time is that there tend to be fewer hours spent repairing things that maybe weren't necessarily an issue. By getting monitoring ahead of time when an issue is developing, an IT firm can get ahead of problems and spend less time chasing what is often user errors. One of the other areas that's very popular right now is the next one to the right, hosted desktops. Now this is in my next area we'll talk about on-premise versus off-site. This is taking your IT infrastructure and moving it completely out of your community, completely out of your management company, and having, for lack of a better term, a virtual desktop or a hosted desktop that appears on your computer. There's nothing running locally on your computer. Now what you've done is you've taken those routine operations that take a lot of your time, installing software, getting new hardware on people's desks, and remove that completely. Hosted desktops lets you use any device to bring up your, and I'm putting air quotes around this, your desktop that looks like it always does for you, but it's coming from a service provider somewhere, and it's got your applications already installed on it. As we need to add or remove applications, those get inserted in that desktop. When you need to update software, say your EHR updates or a simple Office update, you update it once for everybody rather than going to each workstation to update them. So it provides a way beyond just the reducing hardware costs. It really gets down to that lower part of that iceberg where you're not beholden to expertise in your community. It is a fully managed environment that's coming from another location. We also remove any issues around weather effects, Mother Nature, electrical outages in a community, anything like that, now, regardless of those, your staff can operate, whether they're able to do it in a community under those conditions, or if, for example, you are unable to operate in that location and you need to move somebody literally to a coffee house to be able to run your operation from there. At the very upper right, meaning you have the most control over budget and the most manageability of results, is a fully managed environment. And this is different. This is more of an on-premise, in your community approach than the hosted desktop. But this is where you're paying one fixed fee, typically by number of users or number of workstations, for everything in your entire IT environment. This will include your firewalls, your servers, your switches, your wireless infrastructure, your desktops, your software. You subscribe, if you will, to an IT provider, a managed service provider, to just take care of it. Remember the comment about just making it run? This is the just make it run concept. Everything is covered in one price. If a piece of hardware fails, you're not having to worry about whether it's covered or not. It gets covered for you as part of that agreement. A new piece of hardware shows up and your user is up and running. So really kind of a complex model to get at the fact that there are multiple ways to manage your results that you're getting from your IT organization, whether it's internal or external or both, as well as your cost control, your budget control. The last area to discuss is really the location of your IT services. And that comes down to whether you're doing in-house IT, and that may be everything or part of it. The other is hosting portions or all of your IT in other places. Popular one right now, for example, is email. Used to be that everybody had an email server in their organization, whether it's in each community or in your management company and providing it to people. We're seeing email move out to places like Microsoft's Office 365 and other providers where you've got a hosted email. And that really gets at, from that standpoint, a maintenance issue. Now you've taken the focus from somebody being there to make sure that your email server is up and running, care and feeding of it, which is one of the highest areas of use we have, or hours spent traditionally in the past with some of our customers, was care and feeding of Exchange. You've moved that out and let somebody else worry about it. All you care about is you're getting your email, you've got access to your software, your phone sets up the way you want to for your email. But that applies not just to an email service like that, but also to your entire infrastructure. Whether you have your servers and your firewalls on site, or you've moved portions or all of that to a hosted facility. Now what you can start to look is mitigating factors like I mentioned before about weather. For example, if you're in areas susceptible to hurricanes or earthquakes, you've moved your equipment out of that to be less susceptible to those, to be able to maintain your operation as you need to. Another area that you mitigate is hacking and, for lack of a better term, penetration and even physical theft. By moving servers off of your premise where you have a lot of people moving through, you reduce the risk that somebody's going to be able to get into the room where you have your servers, either cause some damage or actually physically remove servers. And we know physically removing servers, especially HIPAA environment, can be a target, as medical records are one of the very large areas that people are trying to steal from organizations. The other thing you shift by looking at or think in terms of where you put your infrastructure is the maintenance as well. Everything is in your community you are maintaining, whether you're maintaining yourself or you've hired somebody to come in on an hourly basis and make sure that it's up and running. If you're able to shift services and hardware, software to other locations, part of your agreement may be that that organization is also taking care of the ongoing care and feeding of that hardware and software as well. So again, three approaches that we talk about there is the structure of your IT firm, the location of your service, and whether you're hosting or not. Yep. So with that, I think we'll turn it back over to Charles, and if we have any questions to bring up from there.
Thank you, Steve. So that was a wonderful presentation. We did have a few questions that came in. Now, earlier in the presentation, you described that it's not about what is cool or popular. It's about what works within your environment. How can an organization avoid falling into the trap of fly-by-night technologies?
That's a great point, and this really applies to a lot of areas. Those cool, especially applications as they come up in your stores, whether you're in the Apple Store or any of those. I really warn people to be wary of, because fly-by-night it could be just that. A lot of these cool apps aren't going to be here in a year or two. And if you started to base business decisions on an application that just came out, you may find yourself in a year or less having to move information, maybe even try and find the information. So that information may be locked into that application somewhere, and find another way to do it. So I really encourage people to find established, tested applications to run their business on. Hopefully that addresses it. But again, avoid that by avoiding the cool, what's new, what's trending in your store. You're working with business class software that you can count on being there to run your operation for years to come.
Another question is, You used a great representation with the iceberg. Describe how that metaphor can be utilized as a tool for organizations or for executives to determine where they stand. And then a second part to that would be, do you offer a tool like this that someone can use?
I guess using the two separate images, the above the water portion of the iceberg and the full image, probably provides a good way for managers, executives to look at their organization and literally see what they see. If I can see what my organization is right now, and that's all you have, that would be that above the water, very, very shallow and very narrow expertise in that particular area. And I think it applies to not just IT, but to any area. And then probably the stretch is to think below the surface, what are the areas of depth and breadth that you hear, whether it is your corporate users, your care staff asking for that they're not getting, and plot that on that breadth and depth, and those may be the things you look for beyond that above the water line. How do you find the below the water breadth and depth?
Now, did you have a tool that could be utilized for this at all? Maybe some sort of document that an organization can, sort of fill out, so I'm kind of taking that tool and expanding on it a little bit, but some sort of document or resource that an organization that you have that could be applied to this.
Well, we do multiple assessments in a lot of our organizations, and whether that's at a base level, a network assessment, probably more of an IT assessment makes a lot of sense to look to see how things are structured, what needs are being met, what needs are not being met. So we have that as a tool, and a lot of IT firms or consulting firms can provide that type of assessment.
Perfect. Now, this third question here, and we'll keep this to just 3 questions. Compliance standards, knowing we all have to ensure we're compliant with laws and regulations in various capacities, what recommendations can you provide for an executive to keep track of and mindful that the organization is compliant or is being compliant?
Well, I think there's a lot of tools they have available out there from some of the regulatory providers, but there are also some experts out there that you can use to make sure that the practices you have, and some of it goes back to the assessments that I mentioned earlier, just to kind of put the litmus test to your environment to make sure that it is secure. That's probably a starting point, and assure that your network, your data, all those things aren't moving in places you don't expect them to.
All right, this gives us plenty of food for thought as to what organizations need to do and consider as they grow. It's hard to imagine just how much strategy and work that goes into properly setting up and expanding the IT infrastructure when bringing on multiple communities, which our management companies are doing these days. So thank you very much, Steve, for talking with us and presenting with us today.
Thank you very much.